We've taken a vote, and you're not family anymore." My stepbrother's voice cut clean through the clatter of silverware. Like a glass shattering in slow motion, he stood at the head of the Thanksgiving table, chin lifted, wineglass still in hand as if he were making a toast instead of an execution. For a second, no one moved. Then the room erupted. Laughter first, sharp, relieved. My aunt clapped. Someone actually cheered. Even my father, who once taught me how to carve this very turkey, leaned back in his chair with a quiet, satisfied nod. My stepmother didn't look at me at all. She just sipped her wine, eyes fixed on the centerpiece like this had all been rehearsed. I stayed seated. The smell of roasted herbs and butter suddenly felt suffocating. My plate was untouched. My hands rested calmly in my lap, though I could feel my pulse, slow, deliberate, steady. Not racing, not panicked, just ready. "You heard him," my stepbrother added, smiling now. "You've overstayed. It's time you moved on. Moved on. From the house I paid the mortgage on. From the business I quietly kept afloat while they spent, borrowed, and celebrated themselves into comfort." I let out a small laugh. Not loud enough to compete with their noise, but sharp enough to cut through it. A few of them turned, confused. I reached down beside my chair and lifted a thin black folder onto the table. It landed with a soft, final thud that somehow carried more weight than his announcement. "Well," I said, folding my hands neatly in front of me, "then I suppose you won't be needing this." The cheering faltered. My stepbrother frowned, the first crack in his confidence. He picked up the folder, flipping it open with casual annoyance, like he expected some desperate plea. Maybe a legal threat he could laugh off. He didn't laugh. His face drained. And then suddenly, he started screaming. I'm the kind of person people don't notice until something breaks. And by then, it's already too late. In our family, I was never the loud one. Never the favorite. Never the story worth retelling at the table. That role belonged to my stepbrother. Charismatic, reckless, effortlessly adored. He had a way of filling rooms. I had a way of quietly fixing what he left behind. Growing up, that difference felt like personality. As adults, it became a system. When my father remarried, I learned quickly where I stood. Not outside the family, but not fully inside it either. Close enough to contribute, distant enough to overlook. Birthdays forgotten. Achievements brushed aside. Responsibilities reassigned. If something needed doing, it somehow found its way to me. The house we sat in that night? Legally mine, though no one at that table would have guessed it. I signed the papers when my father's second business failed, another one of my stepbrothers. Investments that collapsed. Under its own ego, I covered debts, restructured accounts, kept the lights on. Quietly, consistently. They called it helping out. I let them. Because there's a certain advantage in being underestimated. People stop watching you closely. They stop questioning your silence. They assume your patience is weakness. Your absence from the spotlight a lack of power. They never notice what you're building in the background. And by the time they do, it's already finished. Dinner had been unraveling. Long before the vote, it just took me a while to recognize the pattern. My name came up only when it was useful. "You still handling the bills, right?" My stepmother asked lightly, not waiting for an answer before turning back to her plate. My stepbrother chuckled, swirling his drink. "He loves that stuff," he said, like I wasn't sitting 3 feet away. "Numbers, spreadsheets. Keeps him busy." I nodded once, as if it were true. Across the table, my cousin leaned in, lowering her voice, just enough to make it seem private, but not enough to keep it from reaching me. "It must be nice," she said to my stepbrother, "having someone to clean up your messes." A pause, a glance in my direction, then a smile that didn't include me. Even my father participated in quieter ways. When the conversation turned to the house, this house, he gestured vaguely and said, "We've all done our part to keep things together." His eyes moved past me. Not landing, not acknowledging, not correcting. Plates shifted. Forks tapped softly. Someone refilled my glass without asking. Like I was a guest they were obligated to tolerate. Every word was polite, every tone controlled. But beneath it, there was something colder. An agreement I hadn't been invited to hear, or maybe had been meant to. The moment didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It settled in quietly, like everything else I'd ignored for years. It was my father's voice that did it. "Some people," he said, carving into the turkey with slow precision, "mistake obligation for importance. A small thing, almost philosophical. The kind of line that passes unnoticed in most conversations. But not this one. Not when his eyes briefly flicked toward me, just long enough to land. Not long enough to claim it. Not when my stepbrother smirked into his glass, like they were sharing a private understanding. Not when no one challenged it. Obligation. That was the word they had chosen for me. Not partner. Not owner. Not even family. Just useful. I felt something settle into place then. Not anger. Anger would have been louder. This was colder. Clearer. The kind of clarity that doesn't ask questions anymore. I looked around the table. Really looked this time. At the easy confidence in their posture. At the way they spoke over me, around me, as if my presence had already been edited out of the scene. And I understood. This wasn't a misunderstanding I could fix. It was a conclusion they had already reached. So I reached mine. I didn't interrupt. Didn't defend myself. Didn't correct a single assumption. I simply stopped playing the role they had written for me. And prepared to end it on my terms. I didn't start planning that night. I had started months ago, back when the first temporary loan became permanent. When signatures were asked for but never explained. When I noticed how easily my name was used, and how quickly it was forgotten. I didn't confront it. I documented it. Every transfer, every missed payment, every asset quietly shifted into my responsibility. I kept records. Clean, dated, undeniable. I moved conversations to email when I could. When I couldn't, I followed up in writing. Polite, precise, unemotional. Legally, I had advantages they never bothered to question. The house was in my name. A loan, secured during refinancing. When no one else qualified, the business accounts had been restructured. Under my authority. After I covered their debts, I didn't take control by force. I was handed it piece by piece each time they needed rescuing. I accepted every time. That was their mistake. I consulted a lawyer early, not out of fear, but for clarity. What I could claim, what I could enforce, what would happen if I simply stepped back. The answers were straightforward. Ownership doesn't argue, it acts. So I organized everything into a single folder. Notices drafted, accounts outlined, consequences clearly defined, not threatened. No surprises, just truth. Presented all at once, in a way they couldn't ignore or reinterpret. All that was left was timing. The screaming didn't come all at once. It built, sharp inhale, a choked sound, then something louder, roar as my stepbrother flipped through the pages like they might rearrange themselves if he moved fast enough. Their notices, I said quietly. No one else was speaking now. Even the cutlery had gone still. Transfer of ownership confirmations, loan records, default clauses. He shook his head, laughing once, too high, too thin. This is a joke. It isn't, I replied. My father reached for the folder next. Slower. Careful. His eyes moved line by line, and I watched the realization settle in stages. The pause at my name on the deed. The longer silence at the business accounts. The final stillness at the eviction notice drafted but not yet filed. You can't, he started. I can, I said, not raising my voice. I already did. Across the table, my stepmother finally looked at me. Really looked. Not past me, not through me. At me. What do you want? She asked. A fair question. I folded my hands again, the same way I had before. Nothing unreasonable, I said. Just acknowledgement. And for once, accountability. The room held its breath. Because for the first time, they understood the cost of both. No one finished their meal. Chairs shifted back slowly, the soft scrape against the floor sounding louder than it should have. My stepbrother kept flipping pages, even after he'd clearly read them all like repetition might produce a different outcome. His confidence had drained into something restless, brittle. He started making calls, stepping away from the table, voice low at first, then rising when no one gave him the answer he wanted. My father didn't move for a long time. He just sat there, the folder open in front of him. Eyes fixed on the signatures he'd never thought to question. When he finally spoke, it wasn't to argue, it was to calculate. Next steps, options, damage. Too late for both. My stepmother tried a different approach. Softer tone, careful words. She spoke about family, about misunderstandings, about how things didn't need to escalate. But even she didn't deny what was written. She couldn't. Around them, the rest of the table shifted into distance. Conversations turned quiet, fragmented. People who had laughed earlier now avoided eye contact, suddenly aware of how quickly alliances can become liabilities. Because that's what this really was. Not just a family dispute, but a revelation of who carried the weight. And what happens when they finally set it down? I didn't stay much longer after that. There was nothing left to argue, and nothing I needed to prove. For years, I had mistaken endurance for loyalty. Thought that if I kept showing up, kept fixing things, it would eventually be seen for what it was. It wasn't. And that realization, more than anything else, felt like release. Outside, the air was colder than I expected. Clean, quiet. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle in a way it never could inside that house. My house. I didn't rush the next steps. The notices would go out when they needed to. The accounts would close where they had to. I wasn't interested in watching them fall. I had already spent enough time holding them up. What mattered was simpler than that. I would keep what was mine. Not just legally, but personally. My time, my effort, my name. Maybe eventually, they would understand what they lost. Maybe they wouldn't. It no longer changed anything. Because for the first time, I wasn't waiting to be included. I was choosing where I belonged. And this time, I chose myself.